Welcome back to the GKC Show, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We have on with us this week Cy from Hedarian Dragons, and we're joined again with Sam Whitaker, our co-host. And let's get rolling right into it. Cy, you have a lot of exciting stuff going on with your project right now. Maybe we can kind of start off with where that's at, and maybe a little history of Hedarian Dragons.
So we've got some news that we've been releasing, and we're going to be dropping our first NFTs on the 9th and 10th of July. So it's something that we've been working on for a long time. Obviously, it's built on dragons, and kind of what we're trying to do is build a real ecosystem around these dragons and the NFTs. So we've got our NFTs, and we're building this ecosystem, and since kind of day one, we've been trying to, I more particularly have been trying to solve some of the problems or some of the kind of questions that you see out there in the NFT space, and with the kind of building of this ecosystem and the way that we've integrated our utility together, kind of trying to solve some of those problems and create something that's got real qualitative and quantitative value that can last.
And now, just so everybody knows, this is a turn-based card game, kind of a thing, a la you would say like a Magic the Gathering or something in that realm.
Well, the trading card game is kind of one part of it, so that's right. Kind of the gaming experience. In my eyes, at least, the main kind of engine behind the project is the story.
Okay. Nice.
So we're developing a story. I've written a prologue, and the community is kind of putting together ideas. And the idea is that we take those ideas, build on them, weave them together, and we develop this story together. And then we can build on the game with that, and we can build all kinds of other things. The story is the engine that could essentially have limitless ideas come from it, basically. But the trading card game, it's kind of like a poker / Magic the Gathering / chess kind of strategic board trading card game, but it's quite cool. We've done some testing, and it's good fun.
That was one of the things. Oh, sorry. That was one of the things that I really liked about what you're doing is you're very conscious about building around the story, and I think that's a really really savvy thing to do because a lot of projects have their story. This gorilla is stuck in the mud somewhere in Tanzania and you need to help get him out, blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of boring. But having, incorporating like kind of the fantasy realm and making people really a part of it, I think whoever kind of hits the nail on the head with the story, could have a massive thing because you just get these people who are, these holders who are so invested in it that they're just never selling. And when one of your NFTs does go up on the market, it's like, people are just chomping at the bit to get at it. So, yeah, best of luck with that. I really like what you're doing. I'm definitely going to be following along.
Yeah, I'm pleased I took that approach, honestly, because I started off thinking, okay, well, some NFT projects, they seem to just kind of run out of ideas after a while, and that's why the story immediately made sense to me. And I'd chosen dragons, and dragons happen to be very nostalgic in terms of storytelling. And you've got Game of Thrones, and you've got the whole Dragon Ball Z world, and the whole fantasy world is obviously huge. And I'm glad I chose it because since, developing things, everything in the brand has a parallel with the story. In the trading card game, all of the traits on the NFTs, they're related to the powers in the trading card game, but they are also rooted in the story in terms of the crystal eggs are the source of all power, and the dragons have attained these powers from the crystal eggs. But the stories are continuously giving me more ideas, and just naturally, which is just really convenient because I'm never running out of ideas, and that was one thing that I was worried would happen.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about the fantasy world is that it's all fantasy. You just you can kind of go anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, were you a big Dungeons and Dragons player, or what kind of got you into the dragon side of this?
I'm not a Dungeons and Dragons player. I mean, I'm a big kind of sci-fi and fantasy fan in terms of the kind of fictional world. But my wife's from Hong Kong, and I've spent some time living in Hong Kong. And so I've got kind of an affinity for dragons, for particularly the kind of East. Yeah, the East, because obviously the Eastern world, they're considered kind of noble, fortune-bringing creatures, as opposed to the West, which is ferocious, scary things. So I have this nice affinity to the kind of cultural emblem that dragons are, really.
Yeah, I think more from like an operational perspective, like how did you go about? I think this would probably be pretty valuable to a lot of our like a lot of people in our community who either have projects or launching projects. So how did you go about, kind of the genesis? So like when did you start kind of putting yourself out there? Putting D's nuts out there, if you will. And hashtag branding. But yeah, when did you start kind of putting your idea out there? Building your community, and how long of a process, and what has the process been like from start to whatever you said, the eighth or the ninth for your actual minting?
Yeah, well, you say it might be helpful for people. I'm not claiming to be an expert in this in the slightest.
No one
Nobody
is,
is.
So.
Literally no one in this space is an
Yeah.
expert. So any successful stories are good stories.
Yeah. Well, I mean, essentially, I used to do carpentry and some wood carvings, and I had some drawings that I'd intended to carve into wood, and I was really enjoying the Hedera NFT space and joining spaces, listening to things, and it was just the low barriers to entry on Hedera just make it so tempting to get involved. And so I just started throwing around a few images to friends in the space, and they were like, "Yeah, that's really good." And I thought, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll make a Twitter page, and at least no one else can take the idea before I've decided I want to do it. And the next thing you know, you're getting roped into it, and then the next thing you know, you're doing 100 hours a week every week for forever.
I'm familiar, believe me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
well, that's a good sign when it starts to snowball out of control. At least you know you're on the right path.
Yeah, and then it was really just a case of addressing those questions, like how do you make a project sustainable? How do you make a project have the kind of attraction of rarity, but at the same time make it accessible so that you can have a large community? And how do you create something that can not just appeal to the NFT audience, but also appeal to audiences outside of the NFT world?
Yeah, the community piece that you just hit on, I think, is really the most important thing. It's definitely important for us as kind of very early Genesis key members of the DAO for NFT.com. I mean, community is everything. Jordan Freed talked about from day one that we're not. It's in Web3. It's not building a minimum viable product anymore. It's building a minimum viable community. That's how you launch a product. It's just a fact. It's the way it is. Yeah. Going from just having that community is one thing, growing it, maintaining it is another thing. There's so many bright, shiny things out there in the Web3 space. How do you maintain it? I think your idea of, having an ever evolving story is a fantastic idea because that keeps people involved. It's like, you're on Netflix or, when does the next season come out, or Amazon Prime, when does the next episode come out?
Yeah. And that's like people have been like, because obviously we brought this staking out recently, but obviously I'm excited about that, but I'm more excited about what we're doing with Create to Earn. The Create to Earn thing that we're doing is essentially tokenizing all contributions to the ecosystem. So whatever you contribute, whether it's a story idea, a name of a dragon or a character, or you might be a developer contributing tools to the ecosystem, or you might be an artist that wants to create NFTs in the ecosystem. We'll help you do that. And by doing that and helping people create characters and then designing them, releasing them as NFTs, just like you said, people get much more invested. I mean, it's one thing having a large community, but having a community that's there for the long run, that's more important to me. There's people who, like, when they read the story, they identify as someone in that story, or they identify with the people who have written that character's story, and when they talk to each other in the Discord, they're thinking of the character that they wrote and things like that.
It's a sense of ownership, really. Once you have that sense of ownership, you're pretty much locked in. I mean, unless things really go off the rails, it's going to be something you're going to be a part of. So you've done a really good job there.
And I think that's, again, NFT.com, I think is poised really well in what I was saying in terms of the overlap between the real world and the NFT world, because at the moment we're still talking as if the real world and the NFT world are separate things, but they're not. They're completely not. And the sooner we realize that, the better, I think, in terms of things like storytelling, music, community, parties, all these kinds of things. Those are the things that people, and in the real world, people who go to parties and concerts and listen to music and play games and read stories, they're not sitting there or standing there going, oh, I wish I could be gaining passive income from this. They're just enjoying it.
Yeah.
And bridging those two worlds, where you've got people who are fundamentally seeking qualitative utility, like fun and community. How do you bridge those people to this world of quantitative utility, so that you can have kind of a harmony between the financialization and tokenization of things and things that people really want in the real world?
And it's kind of what we talk. I mean, we always say Web3, and Web3 is the buzzword. It's what we throw around. But so many people at the conference last week, the really thoughtful people are talking about the fact that Web3 is kind of a myth. It's that we're never going to be completely decentralized. We're never going to be completely in the digital world. It's some kind of a marriage. It's some kind of Web 2.5, 2.75, and it's how we interact between the two worlds is going to be through NFTs. So it's going to be through some kind of a tokenization of whether it's soulbound tokens, or whether it's your loyalty points for your hotel, or whether it's your gaming history, or what you contributed to the game. It's all going to come together in NFTs. Some kind of a tokenization.
In the retail space, I kind of see it as you've got NFT projects who have leveraged their NFT brand to become enterprises, like kind of Doodles and Yuga Labs, things like that. And then you've got the other thing, which is starting to grow a little bit more, which is enterprises who are already big, who are leveraging their brands, which are already big, to create NFT projects. And where you've got these kinds of two kind of polar opposites, where you've got people building off NFTs and people building into NFTs, that's where NFT.com comes in, because you bridge those two communities and the workforce around them.
I think that, and this is kind of relevant because it went live not too long ago, but that Kumite project is really interesting, in where your NFT is a hero that you can build a story around, and I guess lobby for them to be a part of a larger Kumite story. So how familiar are you with that project, and what are your
I'm not actually familiar with the project, but that sounds very familiar to mine, to be honest.
Yeah, you should. So and I think they're somehow connected or involved with NFT.com founders as well. But I would look into their project, because they're taking the hero angle, but there's definitely some stuff that you might be able to take a look at it and say, hey, maybe that is a direction that we might be able to go in. And again, they're super early too, and they don't have the right answers, but it's great to see other community members feeding off of what other community members are doing to improve everybody's product.
Yes, and for people like us, that's what we're going to get out of NFT.com, right? Is this kind of front seat to watching how these things go with our Genesis keys. We're going to see how kind of the legal and the conceptual side of NFTs develops, with some real big people guiding it.
Yeah, Sai, I really liked what you said there, and it wasn't exactly the way I had thought of it, but it's really, I'm totally going to steal it, by the way. When you talked about some people coming from polar opposites, so the people in the NFT are growing this way, and people who are getting into NFTs are growing this way, and they're going to meet somewhere in the middle, and hopefully that meeting point is going to be NFT.com or
it's going to be somewhere.
And it's almost, when you talk about the kind of institutional corporations that are getting into it, they're scrambling. I mean, I talked to several people who are in that space, and the ones who aren't in it already are absolutely terrified that they're missing the boat, and they're scrambling to get there. It's the fashion industry is really taking hold of NFTs. I think I mentioned on last week's podcast about Dolce & Gabbana. They launched something called DG Family, which is essentially a combination of digital assets, physical, actually Dolce & Gabbana products, plus real world invitations to parties and things like that. And they had 3 different tiers. I don't know what the prices were on the bottom 2, but the top tier was $140,000 a pop, and they sold 75 of them right away.
275.
They sold 75. So they generated $10 million in revenue just out of nowhere, just from having their name and saying, okay, we're going to get into the NFT space. Let's make $10 million.
And you think there's just other boards around the world just looking at each other like, why didn't we do that?
Yeah.
Well, and they're gonna say, how do we get into this really fast? And then hopefully NFT.com will be something that's front of mind for everyone, and will be a community of people who can handhold these, these new key holders or profile holders into, being able to operate a successful business on NFT.com.
And we're all so early to this. I mean, even the conference last week, 10,000 people, whatever. It's still such a small percentage of the entire population that actually understands what we're doing, even though we all admit we don't understand it all, just that understands to the level that we do. And we have a responsibility to kind of make Web 2.5 or whatever it is become what it can be. And that's a huge thing. One of the biggest things I love about NFT.com, and I've said it many times, is the fact that it's going to be DAO run, and that we get to be a part of how that DAO evolves and how it becomes what it can be. And I'm super excited to do it. And hopefully we can be a model for other companies that are not only companies that are launching, but also companies that want to bring in a DAO and say, hey, we want to have a little bit of community governance to what we do. And it goes back to ownership. If you have some community governance, people actually feel ownership of Dolce & Gabbana. They feel ownership of Ford Motor Company or whatever it is, because they're actually involved in the decision-making process.
Well, I wonder how, in the long term, brands that are very centralized brands, even a lot of these are, a lot of these high-end luxury brands are family-owned type of businesses. I wonder how they fare in a Web3 world when they've got competitors who are coming up that are new organizations that are built on a framework of Web3. So yeah, I'm interested to see how that plays
Interesting,
out.
because in fashion, I'm not a fashionable person, but in fashion, it does seem like people, the fashions are led from almost an institutional level, right? It's kind of every year the fashions changed and things like that. Whereas something like gaming, they totally depend on their following and the people and the community and the gamers. It feels like a kind of different dynamic. So in gaming, kind of the success of it is already decentralized. So perhaps it'll be slightly easier to integrate these decentralized ownership elements or ownership essentially. But yeah, like you say, it's how our big, very centralized kind of almost. Oh, looks like Mark's. Are you still there?
Oh, yeah.
It's really interesting to see how these big kind of almost royal brands learn to adapt to a decentralized world.
Well, I mean, Mark, to your point about how these brands are going to evolve, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think it's really going to come down to an adapt or die. I mean, it's going to. I mean, look at Blockbuster, for instance. It's the perfect example.
Right.
Blockbuster didn't embrace streaming. Netflix did, and Blockbuster went from top 20 company in the country. Now there's one.
Yeah.
There's that one Blockbuster still hanging on, and it's wonderful that it is.
Well, and I think you're seeing something like GameStop take lessons from that, where GameStop was on the verge of collapse, right? It was, nobody is going to these physical locations to buy used games anymore. And they're pivoting and they're getting into Web3. So, I mean, congratulations to them. Hopefully they are, a pillar in that community, but we'll see how they make the transition.
And that is, now you mention it, that is almost an example of how the gamification of a community, because that's kind of like what it was, right? With GameStop. The community became gamified. It became a competition almost to keep them up. And essentially anything can be gamified with this whole these tokenized, incentivized mechanisms and everything. It's just crazy.
Hello, everybody. So you might notice that I am in a new setting. Sam is still in the same place, so it looks like nothing has really changed for him.
I even put the same shirt back on.
You did put the same shirt back on. I have a black shirt on. My hat is faced forward instead of backwards.
Right from the start, man. We could have just seamlessly gone on.
Let me just quickly explain what happened. So I was on vacation and I was in a place where I had 5G coverage, but I didn't have a place to plug in. I couldn't see how much power I had left on my laptop, and the whole thing just went away. So here we are back jumping into the conversation. We're going to try and hit up around where we were talking about with luxury brands and NFTs and GameStop and gamification of platforms and stuff like that. So without further ado, let's get back into the conversation. Who wants to?
Yeah, I guess where we left off was kind of talking about the luxury brands and just brands in general that are if they're not already, if they don't already have a Web3 program, they're scrambling to get there. And even the ones who do have a Web3 program are scrambling to ramp it up and stay ahead of the curve. And all of this is going to be tokenized. All of it's going to be something around some kind of NFTs, and I think that's kind of why we're all talking about it right now.
Yeah, Sai had brought up a really good point offline before we were getting onto the call with regards to brands versus industries. So NFT.com can very easily serve both of those. Where if I'm a luxury brand, I can have my own profile. But if I'm NFT.com/cars or /watches, I may be an industry organization that potentially has its own DAO running it. And I love this idea of a DAO inception, of DAOs inside of DAOs, running other DAOs and that kind of stuff. So maybe we can dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing, because obviously all of us on the GKC, we chose our profiles, and everyone was thinking, okay, what's going to be the big ones? And I went with categories. I got jobs and I got property, because there's this idea, if you choose a brand name, then you may get in trouble choosing a brand name. Mm-hmm. And that's something that is completely different to your traditional NFT marketplace, because normally it's an individual who has NFTs, or it's a creator who has NFTs, puts them up for sale, and their profile page, as it were, is kind of just unique to them. It's individual to them. But in the Web2 world, people aren't used to just going to one supplier for everything and kind of searching for things on a creator by creator basis or a supplier by supplier basis. That they go out and they look for a watch, or they look for a car, and they compare things, and they look at things as categories. You don't go, maybe very rich people, they say, oh, I want to go and buy a Rolls Royce. But most people, they say, I want to go and buy a car, right? And I think that's, especially when you're attaching physical items to digital items and NFTs, there's going to be more of that sense of looking for a category. Yeah. So if you've got NFT.com/property and you're looking for properties, then you might not, as a profile owner, I might not want to just invite people to, obviously I'm not going to be listing my own properties. I don't have that many properties to list, but I may want to invite people in the property industry to make multiple listings for their business, or and it's interesting how that could, how we're going to navigate that and introduce that so that we can bridge that gap between Web 2 and Web 3.
Well, there is precedent in Web 2 for things like that, like Etsy or things like that, where you go to Etsy and you don't know exactly what it is that you're looking for, but there's all kinds of different creators that have made physical objects that you can shop for.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, to your point is, the DAO within a DAO. It'd be great. I think we were just talking about how fascinating the evolution of DAOs is going to be for Web3 and what they're going to become. But it's really, on kind of more macro level, it's a community within a community. So, whether it's DAO voting or DAO owned or whatever, however each profile owner decides to set it up, it's really about the community. And it's just like it is for the GKC. It's about our community and how we grow the community. And, within property, within jobs, within cars, within watches, you kind of create a community of like-minded people who are interested in similar things. And how that evolves is going to be fascinating. And I think honestly, I can't speak for them, but I don't think NFT.com management necessarily knows either. And I think that's actually a good thing. I think I would hope that they're building out things in such a way that they can pivot, that they can say, okay, well, that's a better idea. Let's do it that way. And we just don't know how these things are going to evolve. And that's one of the coolest parts about being kind of on the cutting edge of this, is that we not only get to see it happen, we get to be part of it happening and help to figure out how these things are going to become what they become.
I think that for me, what's most interesting in the space is that thing of there's a retail world out there. When we're talking about retail NFTs, right? You've got kind of the more boring NFTs, which play a functional role like licensing and all those kinds of, and identity. And then you've got the fun stuff, which is the retail stuff, the impulsive stuff, and the fashionable stuff. And the interesting thing that I think we'll see over the next few years is that movement from what we were talking about earlier, which was that polarity of NFT projects that turn into enterprises and enterprises that bring out NFT collections, and creating. And NFT.com is obviously the perfect place to bridge those two communities. And when you look at the retail space, competition is different, right? A lot of us in the NFT space right now, we just want NFTs to be big. It doesn't matter who's big. We just want NFTs to be big because we know that there's potential there. Whereas in the retail space, you might not, Bentley might not want to be sat next door to Rolls-Royce. So if you've got NFT.com/cars and you've got a DAO, how do you manage those different stakeholders in that? And that's why the idea of digital real estate on these profiles also interests me, because if you own NFT.com/cars, which I don't, then perhaps you might then sell a portion of your profile page as NFTs. So it might be a large space or a small space or a premium space or a featured space on your page. And then whoever buys that either can use it for their brand or they can lease it to another brand. So that, because, like retail companies and the competitive nature of retail companies may not fit with the DAO element, because you may find that if you had VW, Audi, and all of those brands under the same brand name, if they all had NFTs, then they're going to be voting out Toyota, right? It's going to be an interesting dynamic to see how competition finds itself on that kind of platform.
Well, I see an equivalent being like used cars, for example, like Audi and Chevy and all these other car brands. They don't get to pick and choose what cars, what outlets their used cars are being sold at. So I think that we're going to find this organic marketplace start to evolve that includes like an Audi page for their own stuff, but then there'll be another page where people have their collectible Audi that they want to put in with all the other collectible cars, because that's where people are shopping for them.
Yeah, because you could in theory have cars /Audi /Toyota /Chevy. You could have those in theory, and you could essentially patch the same kind of websites that you see in Web 2 into the Web 3 world, but there's NFTs that represent the physical products as well. There's a lot for us to consider as part of the GKC.
I think subdomains are going to be a big part of NFT.com. I know they haven't really come out and said specifically that they will allow subdomains within our profiles, but it really only makes sense for people who have broad profiles like cars to be able to slice that into sub pages that people can then dive a little deeper into.
Yeah, and Sai, to your point about Bentley not being wanting to be next, and everybody, I don't know why everybody ganged up on Ford Toyota. I mean, they make a nice, sensible car. But I think there's in real life parallel to that is, if you go looking for a car dealerships all tend to congregate. I mean, anywhere you live, there's like a car row where it's like a couple streets next to each other, where all except for Tesla's in malls, but they do their own thing. So I think it would kind of be the same thing that in a digital space they would kind of congregate, and then it would be up to them to market the best and kind of put their brand, just distinguish their brand from all the others, but. People want to have one-stop shopping, so they want to be able to hit Toyota and Honda and Mazda all in the same day.
The thing that will never change is that convenience will always win.
Yeah,
and the same thing with retail spaces. I mean, they're going away now because of Amazon, but the retail brands all congregate in a mall, because if someone, to your point, if someone doesn't go to the mall saying, "Oh, I want to go buy a Banana Republic shirt." No, they say, "I want to go buy a shirt," and they go to Banana Republic, and they go to Gap, and they go to Old Navy or whatever, and they end up picking out the shirt that they want. So I think
I think when I lived in Hong Kong, they have like a street for buying trainers or sneakers, and they have a street for buying wedding dresses and things like that, and it works. Like people love being able to just go to a street and shop for something. With the DAO mechanism, that's the bit where I think it might get a bit difficult, because you might get people ganging up on each other with the voting rights. What I think is really cool though is on nft.com/cars, you won't just have a picture. You can have a trailer as part of your NFT. You can have a video NFT, so that you've got when you go to that website, you've got a vibrant, ultra competitive space where people are competing to have the coolest video NFT to sell their car, right? And I think that's just a really cool imagination.
I think an interesting point there is that they are not going to be competing against everyone else. I mean, they're not going to be competing just within their industry, right? There's going to be a broad range of industries that are going to be represented. So like there might not be a couple of car companies that can, get together and gang up on the other car companies, because their voice isn't really going to be any louder than everyone else across all the industries that are represented.
Yeah, maybe not. It's an interesting dynamic.
But again, I think it all goes back to the fact that just those of us in this community and in other communities, just having the ability to ask these questions has us so far ahead of the game versus the vast majority of the public. And, we obviously believe that these things are going to shape Web3, and that Web3 is going to shape the future of not only the internet, but really society. And just the fact that we're asking these questions and having these conversations really puts us in a position where, we're subject matter experts almost, or we're pretty close to it, because, and honestly, nobody's a subject matter expert. So anybody who can talk intelligently is already pretty high up on the list.
Yeah, just if you're riding the wave, you're in it for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting to see how it goes, and we're all going to learn from each other in the GKC, and it feels like we've got some good leaders to help us implement whatever crazy ideas we come up with.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to learn from other companies. I keep hammering away at how we have to stay collaborative, and so how we have to all work together, and that we're growing the ecosystem in addition to growing our individual projects. So the more we can reach out and talk to other companies that are either starting DAOs or have started DAOs, and maybe they can tell us some of the pitfalls and some of the problems they had early on, the more we can all learn from each other, and then we can reciprocate that once we start getting off the ground to help some burgeoning DAOs to figure out how they're going to figure this whole thing out. The more we work together, the faster we're going to get where we need to go.
So just so you guys know, we're coming close to running up on time. We're about at 15 minutes right now. But so some last thoughts maybe from Sai and Sam on what kind of features you want to see next within NFT.com being released, unveiled. What kind of feature sets are you excited about?
I'll start off so that I know, Sai, we definitely want to hear about your project a little bit before we sign off. So, I mean, honestly, for me, it's building towards the marketplace for NFT.com. I think that's going to be a big, that's just going to be it's going to be a massive leap forward in terms of what we've become. And I like and appreciate what they're doing by rolling things out slowly, and we have the profile pages and things like that. But it's all building towards the marketplace. That's when we really take the quantum leap forward. That's when these Genesis keys get minted like that, when people start seeing the utility. So I appreciate the slow and steady pace, but that's the marketplace is really what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the marketplace is important. That's where the kind of wheels really start getting into motion, and we'll get some momentum behind the building of the project. One thing that I'm really keen on is the idea of interoperability. Obviously, Hedera is a network that I'd like to be supported on NFT.com, but there's so many networks that are coming into it, and one of the big steps that crypto in general, but also NFTs will have to get over the next few years is that idea of removing the friction and removing the barriers to trade and to kind of network bias and those kinds of things, and just making it a whole lot more fun and a whole lot more accessible to consumers.
Yeah, whoever figures that out, it's basically the security piece. So whoever really figures out the security piece in terms of cross-chain communication, that's going to really blow the top off of this thing. It's not going to be easy, but that's going to be a quantum leap for the entire industry.
Well, there's definitely a lot of stuff to look forward to, and me personally, I'm looking forward to that simple little step of just being able to sell the NFT that's within your profile. The step before it goes into a marketplace, that we can actively, there can be some kind of income that is generated from being a part of it, and I think that's going to be a huge step, and then that obviously rolls over into the big marketplace that everybody is really excited for. But
agreed.
Cool. Well, again, Sai, thank you very much for joining us. Check out Hedera and Dragons on Hedera. Is there a webpage or anything that you'd like to direct them towards?
You can go to hederiandragons.com. That's our website, and our Twitter handle is @hederiandragons, HEDERIAN Dragons. New white paper's just gone out, new website, new Discord, lots of announcements happening, and our mint date is the 9th and 10th of July. So we'll be very welcoming to have you in the community, and exciting to see what happens with the GKC and with NFT.com. Really excited.
Yeah, so for your mint, it's going to be the AMA is going to be on the 9th. Is that like if we do it in terms of Eastern time in the US, would that be like evening time on the 9th in the US? Or
we had an AMA last night, and we may do another one on Wednesday. That's to be confirmed. And there is a launch party, which is 10 p.m. UTC on Saturday, which I believe is 7 p.m. EST on Saturday.
That sounds about right.
So if there's any last questions that anyone wants to ask, or if they just want to get involved and find out more about the project, then feel free. But if anyone else has questions of any kind, then I'm always on the end of my DMs in Twitter and Discord, and happy to chat.
And I was told the launch party is a virtual open bar. Is that correct?
It's bring your own beer and an open bar, and it's all of those things.
Yeah, whatever's in your liquor cabinet is.
There you go.
All right. Well, again, thanks for joining us, Sai, and we'll see you around in the GKC Lounge. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and please leave feedback on YouTube. Ask questions. This thing only really works if we get feedback from the community. We don't want it to be a one-way discussion, so everybody get involved. And
in our next episode, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Don.
Yes.
Don from NFTs.com. So tune in for that one.
Cool. And that will be happening this week as well. So both of these are going to wind up being released within the same week.
And that's going to be hard-hitting journalism, by the way.
We take this seriously.
Yeah, we've been getting the softball. Don, get ready, bud.
Cool.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. Cheers for the invite. And hopefully we can talk soon.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate you, man.
Cool. Bye. Cheers, guys. Thanks a lot.